Hey everybody, this is Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. We're here to talk about what is described as a high-risk, complex mission in Gaza that led to the release of the saving of 4 hostages. So, I've seen a lot of news reporting on this. Obviously, news reporters are not going to have the insights that an expert in military operations will have, which is exactly why we need to cover this. I think Off Leash viewers are going to gain a lot, learn a lot from somebody who can literally take us on the ground. So what we know about is this was planned for weeks. They planned this operation with sort of a mock village, which I want to learn from you about. And it was high risk, very complex. They decided for the element of surprise to do this at 11 a.m. local time.
Broad daylight.
Broad daylight. I can only imagine.
The last time that the thing that the enemy would not be expecting. And look, the IDF has had a lot of setbacks. They've been taking poundings in the north. They've had bases that have burned, fields, forests from constant attack from Lebanese Hezbollah. They have not yet finished in Gaza. And the fact that these hostages are still being held in certain areas. And so this was a good victory for the IDF to rescue 4 of their hostages. And the fact that they did this, the 3 male hostages were held in a separate building, 200 plus meters away from where the female was held. And they couldn't get one and not the other because the other one certainly would have been killed. And so they, in broad daylight, in a civilian vehicle with a mattress tied to the roof of the car, at least one of the vehicles, drove up like they were a new family going to move into the building where the hostages were held.
So deception is the first element that they used.
Surprise, deception, moved into the objective and knew exactly which apartment they were in. And of course, it was an apartment by, the 3 male hostages were being held by an Al Jazeera reporter and his father, who is a doctor working for some other NGO, and that the NGOs are whining that these hostage holders were killed in the ensuing rescue operation is shocking. But
that tells you everything you need to know.
Exactly.
About Hamas.
They have a different way of looking at it. So these people were held in the middle of a refugee camp in an apartment building, completely among so-called civilians, and the Israeli security services went in. The leader was hit by gunfire and subsequently died from his wounds. It's a great example of the Israeli senior officers leading from the front. They have a saying, it's follow me. Not go there, but follow me. Mm-hmm. And I'm happy for them to accomplish this. If people want to get a feel for it, so the Israelis, before the war, had a unit called the Duvduvan, which in Hebrew means the cherry on top. And it's the only part of the IDF that had effectively an active role every day that they existed in the Palestinian territories, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza. And so what it was is Arab-speaking Israelis that would go undercover to effect an arrest, a capture, a killing of the known terrorist elements operating in those areas to stop a suicide bomber from getting his bomb and going and clacking himself off. There's a TV show called Fauda, Arabic for chaos, and it was actually the most popular television program in Israel and in the Levant, because people watched it because it represented a very interesting perspective of both the Palestinian side and the Israeli side to the action. So if people want to get an idea, that's exactly what the Israelis did. They did a Fauda type operation of a very small team at extreme risk, driving into the middle of enemy territory. And of course, once it became loud and they had the hostages, they had a hell of a firefight, and a lot of people were killed fighting their way out. But the Hamas operatives obviously have a different perspective on. They will use every limitation and sensitivity that we may have in the West about not bombing schools or mosques or hospitals to put the people there. And in this case, they were held in a refugee camp in so-called civilian apartments. And
So this took place in central Gaza,
yes,
residential area, naturally. And like every operation, I assume, it begins with intel, right? So they get intelligence about the locations of these hostages. And by the way, one of them is the female, as you said, Noah Argamani. She was the face of the assault on October 7th because she was the girl who was held on the back of a motorcycle.
yeah, and taken away from that music festival.
And video cameras capture her anguish and her pleas for help.
Yep.
As these terrorists cart her off. Everyone assumes she's likely dead. So they find Noah. That was a sort of a famous rescue in a way because she was really the poster child of the assault. Almog Mair Jan, 22 years old. Shlomi Ziv, 41 years old, and Andrei Kozlov, 27 years old. So as you say, 3 men in one building, 650 feet apart, and the female in the other. So they had a plan and an attack.
Extremely difficult tactical problem.
Right. So tell us about that. Does that mean that a force is coming in together and they split, or they literally are sort of two forces that have to attack in precision? Any guess?
They have to get their timing almost exactly right, because as soon as one goes loud, the other's going loud.
Right.
And so to time it through the checkpoints and finding parking and gaining access to the building and making sure it's the right apartment and which way does the door open? Does it open in? Does it open out? Does it open to the right? Is it a metal reinforced door? How are you going to breach? You know, there's probably some gaps in their intelligence. They didn't have all of that. And so to try to time it that close, they were, you know, there's a lot of luck that goes into this, and luck was on their side that day.
So we don't know, you know, on what floor of a building these hostages were held. So this is what one of the first things two things that I thought of when I first heard of this successful raid was, first, yeah, the Israelis needed a win. Netanyahu needed a win. The Israeli people needed a win. The families of the hostages needed a win so they can continue to have hope.
It renews hope, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you can't even put a price on that. But then the second was, what are the odds when your presence is known, the IDF's presence is known, that they're prepared to take out the hostages once they know they're being attacked, right?
That's a guarantee that that they would have killed the hostages before letting them be rescued.
Sure.
So they had to kill the people around them that would do that and make sure that the hostages are safe.
So, I mean, obviously, we won't know at all, or maybe for some time, those logistics and how much time they have between arriving at the building, getting to that floor, breaching into that actual apartment. Remarkable. I mean, mind-blowing that there's a journalist and his father who's a doctor.
Al Jazeera journalists.
An Al Jazeera journalist.
Sponsored by Qatar.
So
shocking.
What does that tell us about the rest of the hostages? Any guessing that we can do?
It is unknown about how many are still alive versus dead versus ghosts that are being negotiated with as part of the tactic of Hamas to continue to survive this. You're right. The IDF needed a win, and it was an interesting pivot also because the Chief of Staff, Benny Gantz, and 3 other senior IDF officials that were in leadership positions when the October 7th attack happened last fall have all resigned. And so it's an interesting pivot in their campaign. I applaud officers for accepting responsibility, and I wish it's something that became the habit of U.S. military leadership as well.
Is that a clear act of accountability, their resignations? Or it can
I think
be
they felt
interpreted enough.
certainly how it's being interpreted.
Right.
And look, whether you're a fan of Israel or a fan of the Palestinian cause, no one. The idea of taking hostages as a negotiating tactic is horrific and not something that any civilized people should accept ever. And the Palestinian people are better off with less hostages or the hostages being released, and the sooner this thing can come to a close. And I wish, again, I wish the IDF had listened last fall when we offered to flood them all out of the tunnels. Of note, these hostages were kept in apartment buildings well above ground, not below ground. And again, it's easier to get to them when they're above ground to get that intel, signals intelligence, et cetera, because you can get in amongst them versus trying to get to underground. And what we wanted to do last fall was flood it with millions and millions of gallons of water to take out every tunnel everywhere in Gaza and basically turn Gaza into a duck impoundment. Anybody from North Carolina that's hunted ducks along the flyway will understand exactly what I'm saying.
Is it possible that they didn't, that they thought the risk was too high, that hostages were in those tunnels?
Nope. I think it was politics from the Pentagon that blocked it. And look, militaries have different approaches to things. I think looking back, I think they figured it was going to be easier to finish this than it has been. And the fact that it's not is still really problematic. And so that it's a huge black eye for the IDF that Hamas is still surviving.
So let me walk through, if we can go back for a moment, walk through some of the steps of this successful raid, if you will. I'm going to read through some of the steps, okay? Israeli forces, the command to go was given at 11 a.m. and 25 minutes later the raid started. Israeli forces exchanged gunfire with the guards in the building with the 3 male hostages. In the crossfire, Zamora, the leader of the operation, was injured and then later died at a hospital. As soldiers left the building, they were also met with gunfire and RPG fire, leading to their vehicle being stuck. Other forces came to their rescue and helped them flee. Now, I remember hearing the girl Noah recount her fear being in that vehicle stuck. Take us there for a minute, what that might have been like.
Like anything, it's logistics on the infill or the exfil, and it's becomes extremely complex. And I'm sure the RPG shooters can be on the rooftop, they can be in the streets with you, and any vehicle they were in is not going to be thick enough to withstand the hit of an RPG. So an RPG hit on them becomes fatal. So, and of course, it's a war-torn up area. There's been bombing, there's been tracked vehicles, and again, even if the IDF cleared through that area 3 or 4 months ago, they're not occupying everything, and so it's a possibility for Hamas to reform. And I'm sure there was the Hamas response package was showing up by the hundreds to attack those IDF guys that were fleeing with the hostages. And it looks like they drove them out towards the sea and put them on a helicopter to get out of there.
Yeah, it says the hostages were then taken to 2 helicopters, with the second of those helicopters taking the 3 hostages and Zamora trying to save his life. This quote here says, "This is a surgical operation like a brain operation. It has to be so accurate. Imagine that on a civilian street with a lot of people around with trucks and cars. Imagine that." So, as you described. But if you arrive in a civilian vehicle...
With shooters coming out of the woodwork.
If they arrive in a civilian vehicle for deception, are they likely leaving in a civilian vehicle?
I'd say the IDF forces that responded were some kind of armored vehicles. I think there was a paratrooper unit that rolled in, kind of their quick reaction force. So they probably got scooped up by something a bit more armored.
So here's this amazing raid, this heroic saving alive of 4 hostages, including this young woman who was being held separately from the men, of course, down the street.
She's half Chinese.
Really?
Yep.
Half Israeli?
Half Israeli, half Chinese.
Huh. Wow. Like the news is not covering that, of course, because they wouldn't want, they want her to be an Israeli. They don't want her to be some other culture, right, to bring that into it.
She was enjoying a dance or a music festival.
As a young person,
and
right, having fun. Now, of course, the international community gets kind of mixed on this. Well, sure, I mean, thank goodness their hostages saved, but supposedly under 100 Palestinian casualties reported. So naturally, the international community condemns that. Well, clearly that's the Israelis. Those are marauders, that they would kill innocent civilians in this raid.
And
how do we answer that?
Look, when they would also call the people that were holding the hostages innocent civilians, and I would I think any sane person would forcefully disagree with that.
Right. So we've got the Al Jazeera reporter. His father is a doctor. They are the captors, right?
Yes.
And maybe they're stooges of Hamas. Maybe they're sympathizers. Whatever it is, they are actively involved in holding and in the kidnapping and holding of these hostages. Let's say that report is accurate and there are upwards of 100 Palestinians killed in the operation, but this is what Hamas wants. They want dead Palestinians. So that way there's international outrage over everything that Israel does. That's why they embed these Israeli hostages in a residential area.
In the middle of a civilian area.
Exactly.
Sure. Look, any innocent civilian that was just on their way to the grocery store to get food, of course that's a tragedy.
Right.
But this ultimately falls at the feet of Hamas and all the shooters that turned out to attack the Israelis who were just trying to bring their people home. So it's, there is no substitute for victory, and today was a victory for the IDF.
Right. And, this is the fog of war.
And I would argue that it's a victory for civilization, because whatever side you're on, taking hostages should not be an acceptable approach to warfare. But the IDF had a fantastic victory, good on them, and a sad loss to lose their mission commander.
Right. So, but this victory highlights the conflict that Hamas has created. They use human shields. They're in the residential area. There are still 100 plus hostages. Hopefully, they're all alive.
They claim. I think the real number is much less than that. Sadly.
That's unfortunately, right. The let's take a look at where we go from here. You just had these resignations, from leadership positions in Israel. You have this tremendous victory. Benjamin Netanyahu visited with the saved hostages. We've got Blinken is back over there again, pressuring the Israelis to agree to some sort of ridiculous ceasefire that Hamas is not going to agree to. What do you see happening in the coming weeks?
I see the Israelis being not wanting to yield to make a deal with Hamas that lets them survive. I'd say it's a positive thing for the Israelis that any Israeli citizen knows the IDF will do its damnedest to come for them and rescue them. I think that's important for a country to value its citizens. And I take it back to something Donald Trump did in the last days of it was October of 2020. And there was a young missionary, American kid, like mid-20s, working on his farm with his family in Mali. And he was grabbed by some bandits, some jihadis, and they were driving him south with their band of criminals. And the U.S. was able to watch them from the drone base, which has now been closed, kicked out. From the U.S. drone base that was in Niger, it was open then under Trump. They were able to watch these jihadis, and they were moving south, and they figured they were going to sell this guy to Boko Haram, the Al-Qaeda affiliate in Nigeria. And much to his credit, Trump authorized a rescue. Now, it was public, but not many. Of course, the media doesn't cover it. But in the last days of October, just before the November election, JSOC forces moved to Spain. Spain, free fall into the area, into the desert. They offset, they land, they walk up, they find the hostage takers. They killed all the hostage takers except one guy who was out taking a leak. They let him live. Rescue the American kid, take him, fly him out, done. It was a phenomenal execution of American expertise and American special operations power. And of course, it was no upside for Trump because nobody heard about that rescue. And if there was an incident and an American got killed,
right,
of course, the left, the media would have been attacking him for it. But I think it's exceedingly important that citizenship matters.
This is one life.
One life. And major credit to the JSOC guys who will climb on an airplane, dive out in the dark of night from 25,000 feet into a stack, land, patrol, engage a heavily armed enemy, and rescue an American. I have other friends that have done that have risked and have lost buddies doing that to rescue an American because the citizenship should matter. And when people call and they're under attack and the embassy and the State Department does nothing, it's wrong. We devalue America when we devalue citizenship.
Well, and in fact, Zamora was the leader of this operation in Israel, gave his life. He's a married father of children.
Yep.
Gave his life for the sake of these hostages.
For a warrior to go down, at least he went down doing an extremely noble act.
Exit question on this, Erik. An operation like this, no doubt, there's a lot to learn from it. Do you think we could see similar raids as a result?
It's certainly going to make Hamas harden up even more, and more guards, and maybe put them back underground again. And you can achieve surprise once. Second and third time, almost impossible.
So not likely, just because
Not likely.
Because Hamas will change their activities.
Not likely, not impossible, but unless you can induce some stimulus into the area, which is going to make them move them, it's when they're moving them, especially when they don't want to be, that the vulnerability opens up.
Well, I got to tell you, this is part of the unique nature of Off Leash for viewers, for you to be able to take us on the ground, walk us through these steps, help us understand who've not been in a situation like this, even if it's not your exact experience, but you've commanded operations. So for us to be able to learn about it, we gained tremendous insight.
Well, and again, why does it matter? Because citizenship should matter. And the U.S. spends an enormous amount of money training some magnificent special operations. And there's two kinds of courage to win a war. Individual soldiers' courage, we have a lot of that. But the other part is moral courage. Clausewitz talks about it. You need the moral courage of leaders who will commit their people to an uncertain outcome. And when you have a lot of capability and people that are willing to go, you need to have leaders in Washington with the moral courage to say, go and do good things.
Brilliant analysis. That's it for Off Leash with Erik Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Until our next segment.